I believe we're all correct. Today's meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast by way of the Council's intranet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the Council. As you will see from the agenda papers, generally the public seating areas are not filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or any other training purposes. Proposed public speakers have been made aware of the broadcasting arrangements prior to this meeting. Would members please use their microphones to contribute to the meeting, and please remember to switch off the microphone when you have finished. Members dialing in remotely, please turn on your cameras for the duration of the committee as requested by the Planning Department. Also, could you ensure that you refrain from using any mobile devices during the committee and that any devices are on silent? Thank you. I see we have one apology for Councillor Watkins. Do we have any more apologies? Moving on. Declarations of interest. Any member have a declaration of interest? Nothing. Move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, page 3 to 6. They recommended and seconded by a member. Yep. Councillor Perkins. Yeah. Can we all vote on that, please? Yeah. Yep. On to the agenda. Now before us, application number 25/0375. It's the site, the land formerly known as Whitehead Works, Mendlekeith Road in Newport. And the presenting officer for this will be Grant Hawkins, the Principal Planning Officer. And we also have no public speakers. Thank you. Grant.
Thank you, Chair. This planning application seeks permission for a 66-bedroom care home, use class C2, including access arrangements, parking, landscaping and ancillary buildings on land formerly known as the Whitehead Works, Mendlekeith Road in the Pilgwentley ward. The proposal is reported to Planning Committee as major development with a floor space exceeding 1,000 square metres. The applicant has completed the statutory pre-application consultation process. The LPA has undertaken full public consultation through neighbour notification letter, site and press notices, and this has resulted in one objection. An EIA screening has been undertaken, which concluded the development is not EIA development. The recommendation to members is that the application is granted with conditions. The site forms part of the north-east corner of the former Whitehead Works, which is over 17 hectares in size. It is bound by landscape features to the north, adjoins Mendlekeith Road to the east, Walker Point Way to the south, and residential properties to the west. The site is set down from Mendlekeith Road and is generally flat and level. The immediate context is predominantly residential, although the site is within close proximity to a mix of other uses, including Bellevue Park and the Royal Gwent Hospital. The site is located within the urban boundary and is partially located within Flood Zone 2 and 3C, as defined in the flood maps for planning Wales. The former industrial site is allocated for housing under Policy H1 of the Local Development Plan. An outline planning permission was granted in 2018 for a mixed-use development of up to 529 residential units and 24 assisted living units, with a variation of that permission approved in 2020. Reserved matters approval have since been granted for the full residential element, comprising a mix of houses and flats, and the development is now largely complete. On the screen is the approved outline parameters plan, and identified the area of this application site, in purple, in the northeast corner, for a mixed use, including 24 assisted living units. However, no reserve matters applications have been submitted. This proposal is a standalone full planning application, independent of earlier consents. It is noted that housing numbers and requirements across the wider development site have already been fulfilled and are substantially completed. Some site photographs now to give you some idea of the context. These two photographs are taken looking south down Mendleheath Road. The first photo shows hoarding enclosing the application site and shows the two-storey dwellings east of the highway. Taken further south, the second photograph shows the relationship between the existing dwellings on Mendleheath Road and three-storey flats that form part of the recent redevelopment scheme of the wider site. The first photograph on the left is taken south of the development site and is useful to provide the context of the local area and how buildings of a taller scale along Mendleheath Road already exist. The flatted buildings are of a comparable height to the care home building that is being proposed. The second photograph again shows the relationship between the three-storey flatted building and Mendleheath Road, with the application site and Royal Gwent Hospital to the north in the background. Finally, these two photographs show the site itself and the surrounding relationship with neighbouring residential properties that are located to the west. As you can see, the site is currently vacant, it is predominantly level and is currently enclosed by fencing. So moving to the proposed site layout plan. The building is arranged over 3 storeys and is located broadly centrally within the site, allowing for communal recreational space, soft landscaping, access and parking within the grounds. The setback away from Mendleheath Road helps to reduce visual impact and provides a soft buffer to the eastern boundary of the site. The building has been designed so that it has a central core with 2 splayed wings either side. Externally, it has access to the south via Walker Point Way and 25 parking spaces, including disabled and electric vehicle charging spaces, are provided along with an ambulance and taxi drop-off point. Secured cycle and refuge storage is provided to the south of the building with a substation to the south-east. The overall site is to be secured by 1.8 metre high arch metal rails to the east, low-lever timber knee rails onto the open space to the south, and 1.8 metre hit-and-miss fencing, timber fencing elsewhere. As the site is located within the urban boundary and proposes a reuse of previously developed land in a sustainable location, and the proposed use is considered appropriate within the surrounding context, the principle of development is considered to be acceptable, subject to all other material planning considerations being suitably addressed. This is the ground floor layout plan. Appreciate that it is not entirely clear to members, but it's quite a big floor plan. It's difficult to show you the minute detail of that, but I'll sort of talk you through it. So the facility will be fully compliant with the National Care Standards Act 2000 and result in statutory guidance, providing single-bedroom accommodation with ensuite facilities and communal and recreational space. An extract of the bedroom plan has been provided and shows that this will be 14.6 square metres with an additional 4.1 square metres of ensuite space. The scheme is designed to provide general residential and residential dementia care, although this cannot be controlled through the planning regime. Its plan layout can be flexible depending on the need of the home. The floor plans demonstrate that all bedrooms are served by suitably sized window openings that allow outlook, natural light and ventilation for residents. The main access is via the west-facing entrance lobby, where my cursor is showing now. 2 lifts are provided centrally, with communal facilities provided on each floor, including lounge and dining areas, a tea room and a library within the central core. Additional communal spaces are located throughout the building and include a cinema and a quiet lounge. The overall layout of the building, bedroom design, access to communal facilities and external amenity areas have been assessed and are considered to provide residents with a satisfactory level of amenity in accordance with Policy GP2. Moving to the elevations, The proposed building measures approximately 77 metres wide by a depth of 17.5 metres, and the height ranges between 11.7 metres and 12.8 metres. The building design has been negotiated, and the final scheme includes a stepped pitch roof as opposed to the originally proposed flat roof design, which was not supported. Stepping the roof height provides rhythm and void and creates visual relief to the overall building and a variation in interest across the elevation. This gives the building a distinctive appearance and in turn is considered to contribute positively to the character and appearance of the streetscape. The stepped roof line, along with the roof tips at the ends, help to reduce the scale of the building and manage its overall mass. The overall height of the proposed building is 40 centimetres taller than the three-storey flats that have been granted and built along Ymddiheuriadau Road, as shown on the earlier site photos. However, it is noted that the site is to be set down from the highway, and a cross-section later in the presentation will demonstrate that. A mix of brick and render finish is proposed, which are traditional materials that reflect the local vernacular. Fenestration will comprise of anthracite grey windows and doors, and architectural detailing includes brick sills and headers and window surrounds, which are proposed to create visual interest, with the use of horizontal cladding also introduced between openings to break up the massing of the facades. The applicant has delivered a care home of a similar design elsewhere, and this slide and the next slide provide photographs of a real-life example of a closely comparable building, and hopefully this is useful to help you envisage what the building will look like in reality. You will note that comparable stepped roof form and articulated facades are proposed, which help to break up the overall massing, along with the varied use of materials and window detailing to add interest and relief. Overall, the proposal is considered to be well designed, with a strong quality of appearance and robust materials chosen. It meets place-making objectives and would make a positive contribution to the local character and visual amenity of the area, and as such is compliant with policy GP2 and GP6 of the plan. The proposal has demonstrated that the amenity of future occupiers would be acceptable. It is also necessary, in accordance with policy GP2, to ensure that there is no significant adverse impact on the amenity of neighbouring residential properties. To the east, properties at 138 to 154 Ymddiheuriadau Road are located approximately 30 metres from the proposed building. This exceeds the minimum separation distances, and as a result, there will be no unacceptable overlooking, overbearing impact, loss of light or sunlight between the site and the properties. A similar relationship also applies to the flats at Elm Tree House to the south and properties at Walker Point Close to the southwest, where separation distances are greater. The closest neighbouring properties are 24 and 26 Cape Yelcho Road to the west. Show these two. Number 26, where my cursor is, and number 24, slightly further north. These side elevations contain either no windows or a first floor bathroom window, and there is no direct relationship with protected habitable rooms. Separation distances to rear gardens are acceptable, and no harmful impact in terms of privacy, outlook or sunlight have been identified. The officer report has outlined this assessment in greater detail. To further safeguard amenity, it is recommended that the 1.8 metre high glazed screen proposed to the first floor terrace in the west elevation of the building is fitted with obscure glazing prior to first use, and this is to be secured by condition. So for reference, that is the area above the lobby here, which is a small raised amenity space serving the tea room. Overall, whilst relationships between the site and the neighbouring area will change, no significant harm has been identified to residential amenity, and the proposal complies with policy GP2 of the local plan. Moving to highway safety and parking, As previously mentioned, 25 car parking spaces, which include disabled spaces and electric vehicle charging spaces, are to be provided on site. Parking has been raised in the sole neighbour objection that has been received, with concerns that the development will increase parking within local streets within the area. The adopted parking standards require 1 space per 3 non-resident staff and 1 space per 4 bedrooms for visitors. With there being up to 25 members of staff on shift at any one time and 66 bedrooms, this would equate to 24.5 spaces. The application has been supported by a transport statement that considers the sustainable transport hierarchy for planning has been considered, and that parking provision has also been based on the applicant's operations elsewhere and also technical data available. The 25 spaces provided meets the Council's adopted guidance and has been accepted by the Council's Highways Officer. No issues have been raised in relation to the site access, which has been commented that there is good visibility noted. Final details of cycle and refuge storage will need to be controlled by planning condition, along with a construction environment management plan and implementation of parking on site prior to the first use of the building. The Highways Officer has raised the point regarding mobility scooter charging provision. However, this is not a matter that can be controlled through the planning regime, as there is no policy control over it. However, in response, the applicant has confirmed and clarified that there is adequate space for the parking and charging of mobility scooters within the building's lobby, and space has been provided for this. Overall, it is considered that the proposal is compliant with policies SP1, GP4 and T4. Chapter 6 of Planning Policy Wales states that planning authorities must seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity in the exercise of their functions, and that proposals will need to incorporate green infrastructure and, through the stepwise approach, demonstrate a scheme of enhancements to ensure net benefit for biodiversity. The application has been supported by a number of reports in relation to ecology, biodiversity and protected species. The preliminary ecological appraisal acknowledges the existing condition of the site as being a former industrial use and concludes the development is unlikely to result in any impact on identified ecological features. In terms of the stepwise approach, to the north of the site, other than 1 tree which has been identified in surveys as being in ill health, the existing green corridor is to remain unimpacted by the development. Submission of a tree protection plan, along with details of tree protection fencing, is to be controlled by the planning condition to ensure that this is protected. A proposed landscape scheme has been developed over the course of the application, and whilst the landscape officer still has some concerns, these are not considered to be fundamental to the layout of the site, but more an issue of detail and specifications that can be controlled through a planning condition for a final scheme of landscaping for the development. A scheme of soft landscaping and measures including bird and bat boxes, also to be controlled by condition, have been considered by the Council's ecologist as being proportionate enhancement measures for the site. On this slide we have a cross-section which shows the site and Mendlekeith Road. The cross-section on the slides outlines how the site is at a lower level than the highway and how the boundary can be planted to soften any visual impact and provide a positive impact on the streetscape. 2 buildings, as identified by the 2 arrows, at the former site entrance are to be demolished to make way for the development, and bat emergence surveys have been undertaken to ensure that the European protected species is not harmed. No bats were observed emerging from the building, and as such, roosting bats are considered likely absent, and a licence is not required. The survey has, however, recommended that a bat method statement is established as a precautionary measure to protect the European protected species, and this is controlled within the conditional regime. Green infrastructure, biodiversity and ecology, and the provision of soft landscaping at the site is all acceptable subject to the conditional regime, and the proposal complies with Policy SP1, GP5 and Planning Policy Wales Edition 12. Turning to flood risk, the site is located partially within flood zones 2 and flood zones 3 at risk of flooding by sea, as per the flood maps for planning. The eastern area of the site is not in a flood risk zone. So for clarification, our site's outlined in red. The lighter green is flood zone 2, where there is no colour, it's just a background that is not a flood zone. and flood zone 3 is this small portion of the site that just stems from the southern boundary. The redevelopment of the site assists with the development plan strategy to regenerate an existing settlement by bringing a previously developed vacant site within the settlement boundary back into a sustainable use. As such, the proposal is considered to be justified in this location. In terms of the technical assessment, a flood consequences assessment has been submitted, and this has demonstrated that the proposal has complied with the technical criteria and tolerable limits as set out within TAN 15, as outlined and assessed in full within the officer's report. Natural Resources Wales has confirmed they have no objection to the proposal in terms of flood risk and advised that they are satisfied that the risks and consequences of flooding can be managed to an acceptable level. A planning condition requires submission and compliance with final site and finished floor levels of the building to ensure consistency with the flood consequence assessment. There were no concerns with the proposed levels that have been shown on plans. As such, the proposal is compliant with policy SP3 and TAN 15. Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water initially objected to the application due to existing utilities crossing the site and potential impacts from the proposed siting of the building. The applicant carried out on-site investigations, including GPS-located trial pits, confirming that the building outlines outside the protection zones. Following reconsultation, Welsh Water withdrew the objection, confirming that the proposal will have no adverse impact on their infrastructure. Welsh Water do advise that the local water network currently lacks capacity to serve the development without affecting existing customers. They have requested that a hydraulic modelling assessment to identify any necessary reinforcement works is submitted. This must be completed before connection, with works implemented prior to the first use of the building. It is recommended that this hydraulic modelling assessment, with details of required enforcement works, if necessary, is controlled and secured via planning condition. The applicant is aware of this condition, and they are currently liaising with Welsh Water on this matter, and the hydraulic modelling assessment has been actioned, and it's over to Welsh Water to undertake this works within line with their schedule of works for the area. In terms of final matters, with regards to the council's heritage officer, they are satisfied that there is no adverse impact on heritage impact in terms of Bellevue Park, which is a conservation area to the north of Cardiff Road. And the council's senior scientific officer has raised no air quality concerns and has recommended conditions in relation to land contamination. Overall, as outlined in full within the officer's report and summarised within the presentation today, it is considered that the proposal complies with the relevant local and national plan policy and is considered to be acceptable. It is therefore recommended that the application is granted subject to the conditional regime put forward within the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. I'll open the application up to members to discuss. Councillor John.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Just on the one point there with the parking and everything else for staff parking for residents, you said it's with the parking zone 4 and everything else, you have one space for 3 non-resident staff and 1 space for 4 bed for visitors. It just says 25 spaces. I've made that out to be 32 spaces roughly, or maybe more than that, because if you put in 1 space per 4 bed for visitors, you want 12 spaces actually for visitors to use, and 25 spaces then as well for staff. So how can we got 25 spaces for the staff be on site as well? So how does that work out for the ratio for that one?
Okay, so I checked the calculations, and they were checked by the council's highways officer, who was confirmed that he was happy that it was compliant with the council standards. So without doing the very quick maths off the top of my head now to confirm that, but both parties have checked that. With regards to, notwithstanding that, the applicant has also provided TRIX data, which is technical parking data from comparable sites for sort of care home use of a comparable size and a comparable location, to support the level of parking and also traffic movements in and around the area as part of that transport statement. And they're site knowledge from other sites that they use. So, for example, the site that I showed you the photograph of the elevations, that was in Wootton Bassett. I think that's either a 64 or 66 bedroom care home as well, so comparable size. And for example, I just out of interest, I looked there and there's 20 parking spaces that they use there. There doesn't appear to be any highway sort of issues or highway safety issues. So, yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm not sure whether Kevin, the highways officer, has got anything to add over and above what I've just mentioned. So, Kevin, I can invite you in if you do, or if you don't, just confirm. But we are satisfied going through that there is adequate parking.
Yeah, I think the relevant point may be that what we're interested in is how many staff are on site. So there's a number of shifts here. There's probably 3 shifts. So the actual number of staff isn't really the number we're looking at. It's the number of staff on site that's relevant. Is that helpful?
Yes.
No, not really. If you've got staff coming in the morning and staff coming in the afternoon, where's the staff going? If there's not enough parking spaces for the staff to put their cars in the afternoon or the morning, I mean, it's going to be a crossover with parking area, then, isn't it?
Yeah, with regards to that, in the transport statement and within the plan document submitted, the applicant has helpfully provided the shifts of staff, so it's not just over one change. From my recollection, there's a few changes over the course of the day with different members of staff depending on their role coming at different times. So it's not just perhaps like maybe a factory where there's one 12-hour shift finishes, one 12-hour starts. They will be a little bit staggered. So as Kevin's mentioned, we've looked at I think it's 25, maximum of 25 members of staff on any one time. So that's the maximum. Divide that by the 3 for the one space for 3 non-resident staff comes up at 8-point-something parking spaces. So there will be visitors potentially that will take up some parking spaces as well, but we're not anticipating that residents would have cars parking there given the nature of the use. So like Kevin's mentioned, we're looking at the number of staff on site at any one point, and we are satisfied that the 25 spaces provided would be able to accommodate staff and visitors even during those changeover periods over the different parts of the day.
So it's just mainly then going to be a normal care home. It's not going to be a residential, or will there be people that actually live there then will be self-sufficient as well, or would it be all for the care?
So, if I understand your point, the residents will be living on site. Yeah, there will be the applicant's statement has advised that there will be elderly residents or elderly residents and or residents with dementia. So generally we wouldn't expect residents to have ownership of a car given the nature of the application site.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Horton.
Hi, thank you. My question is about the previous use for this, specifically the site which we're talking about. The reason why I ask is because I'm aware that this was initially going to be the commercial space for the residential units. I'm just wondering what's being put in place to sort of mitigate that loss for the residents.
Sorry. So yeah, in terms of the outline plan of permission for the overall redevelopment of the site, this area within the land use parameters plan, which was highlighted in purple in the northeast, was allocated as part of that planning permission for a mixed use. So it was, it could, perhaps be a shop or public house or something like that. I don't think it was necessarily specified exactly what it would be intended to be used as, but it was allocated for that use, as well as up to 24 bedroom assisted living facility. No applications have come forward, no reserve matters applications have come forward in relation to this parcel of the site. So reserve matters applications have come forward for the new Pilgwentley Primary School, which is currently in operation, and all of the other residential areas within the site, which, as I mentioned, are substantially sort of built out and in operation. No applications have come in for this site. There's no legal agreement as part of that outline permission that says on the occupation of X number of houses, such facility must be provided. There's no tie in the legal agreement for that. It was just part of the overall development site. That hasn't come forward, so presumably there's not an appetite for that. Okay, so I understand what you're saying. However, I know, because I was told, because I expressed an interest in it when it was initially developed before I was a councillor, in one of the commercial spaces, and I was told categorically that once they achieve a certain number of house builds, that's when they'll start to build those units. Also, that the reason they hadn't started it is because that is where they put all their services, and the cost to move all their services, as in the site storage and stuff, was extremely high. So I accept what you're saying. However, does it make planning permission for things, for building, for sort of large open spaces to be turned into housing, does it make it more, increase the appetite of the council when they are saying there's amenities being offered? And also, as in the commercial spaces, also, it's like, how many of the residents would have purchased these houses under the misconception, with all the literature that they were piling out, and there was quite a lot of literature they were piling out about this commercial space that was going to be developed, purchased these houses under some form of misconception. That's my concern, is how often does this sort of thing happen? It's like, how many people bought houses on that site, on that parcel of land, believing to be in the future there was going to be amenities which would enhance their lives? Now, that's gone from this application. You did mention initially there was some 26 space residential living included in the initial application, but that's obviously escalated up high, and the what should we say, the less valuable asset is now being taken away, and this larger facility is now being proposed. It just seems a little bit, to me, doesn't seem quite right that people was possibly being missold a concept. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not able to comment on the sort of the marketing element for the developer in terms of what they may or may not have said to residents. From a planning perspective, if that sort of mixed use type development was absolutely necessary to make the overall development acceptable, as in there has to be, whatever services might have been proposed, then that would have been controlled through either the conditional regime or through the Section 106 legal agreement. That wasn't. So it isn't something from a planning perspective that makes the overall development site acceptable. So that's why I would imagine that's why we didn't control that, because it wouldn't have met the conditional circular in terms of meeting the legal tests to put a planning condition on, or the Section 106 tests. So I understand your point about what may have been said to residents by the developer, but from a planning perspective, there isn't anything that prevents us from assessing this application on its own merit and considering that it is acceptable. I guess the only other point I would make is we consulted 104 properties within the area on this application, and we did only receive one response, and that was in relation to parking, highway safety, as I mentioned. So residents have had the opportunity to comment on the application, but it hasn't been raised as an issue. So I'm not saying that there isn't perhaps some people that might be a little bit disgruntled, but from a planning perspective, there's nothing we could sort of do to remedy that, I suppose. And I hope that clarifies. That. Yeah, no, I completely accept that. I guess my real question, or the underlying real question, is how often do planning, so big builders, put forward a scheme which includes something which residents would very much like, and then pull it later on in the build phase, towards the end of the build phase, where something else has shown itself to be more valuable to them. It's not something for you to answer, but it's more of a sort of an inquiry, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, first of all, can I apologise again for not being able to put my camera on? I've tried every setting I can think of on this computer, and nothing's working. So, in terms of the vote, if I need to sit out, I'll leave that to your judgment. But I have tried everything that I can. Thanks, Grant, for the presentation. You'd be glad to know that my long list of questions has been drastically shortened by some of the answers that you've given us. I do still have a couple of minor queries, if that's all right. The first one, on page 22, it mentions about a requirement for reinforcement works to the local water supply. Now, I think that's been dealt with by condition, but can I just confirm that and make sure that that is going to be enforced for, obviously, for that development to proceed, because that did seem to be quite important. On page 22 of the report, it was reinforcement works to the local water supply.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of my conditions, it's a preoccupation condition. It's condition 13, and that is for the hydraulic modelling assessment, which basically says that the hydraulic modelling assessment has to be undertaken, and then any works that to reinforce the water supply for the site and the local area that are required as a result of that hydraulic modelling assessment have to be submitted to us to let them, so we can reconsult with Welsh Water, and undertaken, once they're agreed, undertaken prior to the first beneficial use of the site. So that is controlled via the planning conditions, so that is enforceable and written in a way that we're obviously satisfied meets the requirements for planning conditions. Yeah,
that's what I wanted to confirm, really. It was a has to rather than a would like to.
No, we're happy that the way it's written. The wording has been provided by Welsh Water, and we've just amended it ever so slightly, just to make sure we're happy with the exact wording of it and that it is compliant with the planning circular for conditions. But just, I guess, as a little bit of a background, the applicant's been aware of this for some time now, and they have been engaging with Welsh Water regarding this matter, and they have they've authorised that the hydraulic model assessment is to take place. So it's scheduled to take place, as I understand, in the next few months, depending on Welsh Water's own schedule of works to take place. So it is something that's ongoing in the background that all parties are aware of, so it's certainly not going to come to anyone's surprise.
Right, okay, thanks, Grant. I did have a question about parking, but that's been dealt with earlier on, so I won't repeat that. There was a quick question as well about contamination. There was a mention of contamination potentially from sort of diesel organics and asbestos. Again, I just wanted to just confirm that condition that has been addressed.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, the wider development of the site has undergone a lot of reports and testing over the years with regards to the residential development of the site. So there's a raft of information available in relation to contamination. A report has been submitted with this application that specifically looks at the development site and has been reviewed by Natural Resources Wales and our senior scientific officer, and they both recommended some conditions that have been included within the conditional regime. If you bear with me, I can point you to the numbers. Number 8, is it? Number 8, I'm being told. Contamination condition, basically requiring submission of further details and information, and with some caveats that if issues are found, etc., then they need to be submitted, and verification report upon completion to demonstrate that the works have been done. So it's a standard wording of condition that we use for any development where there's a risk of ground contamination.
Right, okay.
Any unforeseen contamination is controlled by condition 20 as well.
Okay, that's great, thanks. My last question is to do with the landscaping. There's two things really. I just want to find out, has the applicant actually provided any sort of revised landscaping scheme to try and deal with the problems that were raised? And the other thing to do with the landscaping, I notice it's got a maintenance schedule for 5 years. So I'm just wondering what happens after that. Do they renew the contract? Do they get sent out a tender? Do they actually have an obligation to maintain it after 5 years, or?
Okay, so in terms of landscaping, the first round of comments were received from the landscape officer during the initial consultation period for the application. They were provided to the applicant, who went away and submitted a revised scheme for comment. Some of the changes, for example, were on the eastern boundary with Mendleheath Road, which is probably the most sensitive in terms of sort of visual amenity. And we've got like native hedgerow planting, some tree planting along there. So in principle, that element is fine. So that's something that's changed, and they've responded to during the course of the application. The comments from the landscape officer predominantly just dealt with like the specification of planting, so maybe what shrubs might be used, and the densities and the exact locations of planting, things like that. So it's very rare that you'll get a full completed soft landscaping scheme submitted up front with a full planning application, particularly on a larger development site. And that's why we generally leave it to a planning condition, that they'll go through their final design of everything, and then they'll submit the final details of the soft landscaping. It might also have relevance to the SAB application, because for a site of this size, they'll require separate SAB consent for surface water drainage, and features of biodiversity features and things like that will form part of that. So they'll sort of come together as one sort of scheme, I guess. But we've got control of that being submitted. But we've got no fundamental issues in terms of the layout of the site not being able to accommodate landscaping, because it's a very large site and there's a lot of scope for landscaping. So it's just a matter of botting that detail out.
Okay. What about the maintenance after 5 years?
So we use 5 years. That's our standard condition, says that the applicant has to maintain it in accordance with the maintenance plan, a management plan that's submitted to us, and our landscape officer agrees with. After 5 years, but each year, or maybe every 1 year, in year 3, they submit details to us to demonstrate that it's been done and that it's being, managed to an acceptable degree. And if there's any issues such as species dying, for example, within that first 5 years when they submit those reports, the condition means that they have to, plant them back, replant, or remediate the works of the landscaping, whatever's necessary. After 5 years, landscaping is generally established to the point where it will usually pretty much look after itself. So we can only sort of control it for 5 years or so through the condition, and then after that, there will be probably a general maintenance plan, but by year 5, landscaping will be well established on site.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And less likely to sort of die off or anything like that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay. Thanks, Grant. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones, get your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, really. With the access to the development, it looks like it's one entrance, one exit. With this type of building, you'll have laundry vehicles delivering fresh linen, taking dirty linen away. You'll have some food vehicles delivering fresh food, I would imagine, for the kitchens. And also you've got the waste vehicles from Equal Council, which will probably be contracted, hopefully. But with the entrance and exit being confined to that side street, is there proposals outside for yellow lines to ensure that the vehicles are outside to get easy access in and out?
The access has been assessed first and foremost. Been assessed for the proposed use of the site and vehicles associated. That's been considered acceptable, and also with terms of visibility, pedestrian visibility, because you'd expect residents to be walking up and down. That's all been considered acceptable from the technical consultee. In terms of yellow lines, that would be something that would be looked at through sort of the highways control rather than planning. That's not something we can control under the planning regime, because ultimately it's works to a highway. So there would be separate, if the road will be adopted as part of the wider development site, I would imagine. If the highways department feel that it is necessary to secure yellow lines or measures like that, then that would be their remit rather than the planning remit to control.
Yeah, thanks for that information. Sorry, it's highways, but obviously residents or cars, vehicles parked along that street will restrict the access and create a problem for pedestrians and entrants, going in and out of this property. So, okay, it might not be the right place, but it's to be noted, I think, for highways to take a look at, because I think, in my experience, that will create a problem in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cox, do you have your hand?
Right, sorry about that. There are two issues. One is that this obviously is a large development, and from the presentation and the information that's been provided here, that it's a large development, but it's also extremely close to existing residential properties that I'm just thinking of some of the other big developments that are going on around the city that it's difficult. There aren't many where there's a development of this size right up against existing houses. So I was just interested in, I know there'll be a camp will be put together, and obviously that's included in the report. But I'm just interested, I think, first of all, in the regime that will be put in place to monitor that. I mean, there are all sorts of conditions here about dust, about vibration, about noise, about vehicle movements. There's an enormous amount going on. So are officers confident there's a regime in place that will be able to monitor that effectively, which would be important to local residents? I wondered also the fact that there is a mention in the report that, I know there's been a survey, but there's a mention that there is a potential maybe for toxic materials. Does that provide an extra sort of issue? I mean, if there's dust being created, and for example, and this is an old industrial site, I'm wondering what extra challenges that poses. That was one question. The second one was about flooding. That the site is designated as highly vulnerable, presumably because of the nature of the residents. It does say in the report that normally the development of this kind, that residential bedrooms basically would often not be on the ground floor, for example. And it talks about maybe an evacuation plan, but that appears not to have been submitted with the application. Obviously, I don't need to be very imaginative to think that a development like this being flooded with vulnerable people in there, it could be quite a challenge. And I'm just interested in whose responsibility it is to ensure that there is eventually a acceptable evacuation plan.
Thank you for your questions. Firstly, in terms of the environmental, noise, etc., point raised, yeah, the Kemp, obviously similar to the landscape, I suppose. It's not very unlikely you would receive the full details of a Kemp up front with an application, which is why we put the conditions on. So prior to any work starting on site, the Kemp will need to be submitted to us. We've listed some information that we would expect to be fed into the Kemp. In relation to dust, vibration, noise, as you referred to, traffic routes, things like that, management of the overall site during the construction period. So the Kemp will be a document that is submitted to us. We will have to review when it is submitted to us, alongside our colleagues in Environmental Health, Natural Resources Wales and Highways, and we will have to be satisfied that everything in there covers off the constraints of the site and the sensitivities, the receptors to neighbours, etc. And if we're happy with that, and we're happy with the wording that it's robust and that we can enforce it, then we will grant it. If a Kemp comes in and it's very loosely worded and we don't think actually that's not very enforceable, that's a bit wishy-washy, then we can either ask for it to go back to be changed, or we can refuse that Kemp and say it's not acceptable. We need, they could have to resubmit a new Kemp. So at this stage, the Kemp hasn't been submitted in full, and we will expect it to be fully detailed when it does come to us, and we'll liaise with our technical consultees in relation to that. There's also the I guess, extra protection of Environmental Health having their own regulatory powers. So in regards to sort of statutory noise complaints and things like that, Environmental Health often have quicker powers than planning have to react to sort of like noise, for example, or dust. So there is two elements, or two aspects that councils can look at in terms of the planning enforcement, and also Environmental Health having their own regulatory powers. So we're confident that when the KEMP is submitted and we've reviewed it and we're happy with the detail of it, that will be enforceable by ourselves and also Environmental Health having their own regulatory powers. So hopefully that clears that off. In terms of the contamination question, in terms of the, the preparation of the site, within that KEMP there will be measures that look at contaminants, things like that, and how we don't want waters running off and potentially impacting water courses and things like that, or the wider area. So that will all have to be covered off within the KEMP. So hopefully that clarifies on that. The next point, flooding. So the site is in, as I mentioned, I can bring up the slide again, it might be useful. 2 seconds. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah. So what we've got here is an extract from the flood maps for planning. The site is predominantly in flood zone 2 at risk of sea, which is the lighter green that you can see. Flood zone 3, which is a slightly higher risk, is the small part to the south, the little point you can see, and then the area in white, which is just the underlay of the map, is no flood risk zone. So that eastern side of the site is not within a flood risk zone. So a flood consequence assessment has been submitted, as will need to be for development in flood zone 2, flood zone 3. You're correct that the application is highly vulnerable development because there's that residential element of it. It's considered to be a higher risk in flood risk terms, rather than perhaps a less vulnerable industrial use as per the previous use of the site. We've undertaken the tests, and they're set out in the officer's report, and there's 7 or 8 different tests that we look at. The 2 of the key tests look at how the site will react, how the site will flood in a 1 in 200 year event, and also the 1 in 1,000 year event. So given the levels that we've been provided with, which is the site will be a minimum of 8.4 metres above ordnance datum, it won't flood in the 1 in 200 year event. So that is policy compliant with TAN 15. The criteria of TAN 15 that looks in the 1 in 200 year events, it won't flood. If it's set at 8.4 metres in the 1 in 1,000 year event, it will flood up to 600 millimetres. The tolerable limit in TAN 15 for 1 in 1,000 year events is 600 millimetres. So it's up the. That's not to say it's not acceptable if it flooded over, but in this instance it does, and it does comply with the advice note, the Welsh Government advice note. What is also noted is the minimum level of the site will be 8.4, but what we've got is plans for the building that show it to be 8.75 metres. So at 8.4 metres it will flood at 600, but 8.75 is 350 mil less, or 350 mil higher. So the flooding will only be 250 mil, so it will be less than if it were 8.4. So we're satisfied that it is within the tolerable limits as set out in Technical Advice Note 15, and therefore it complies. Natural Resources Wales have confirmed they have no objection in terms of flood risk, and that the flood risk at the site can be managed. There's in terms of the evacuation plan, that's not something that in planning we would look to control. That would be something for the user to have in place as their responsibility as the user of the care home provider of the site. We don't have the as part of our test, we don't look at whether there is an evacuation plan, albeit the FCA does recommend there will be one. But what you can see, so I've just stopped sharing my screen, what you can see is that obviously the site is very close to the edge of the flood risk zone. Menelgeith Road, which is at a slightly higher level, is outside the flood risk zone, as is Cardiff Road to the north. So there is clearly areas within close proximity of the site that wouldn't flood. And with the flooding, the nature of the flooding, there would be advance warning that there might be a flood event taking place. In terms of the ground floor residents, this is something that we've looked at, and in flood zone 2 and 3, generally speaking, sort of self-contained accommodation at ground floor is not supported, because if someone's in a flat, for example, or residential unit at ground floor in a flood risk zone and it's going to flood, then they may not have the opportunity to seek refuge at higher ground. In this instance, the whole use is a communal use overall, and residents, with the support of workers, would have plenty of communal areas at first floor and second floor that would be available, that would be flood-free in the event of a predicted flood event. So if it was chosen not to evacuate the site, then there would be almost that fallback position where residents would be able to be supported to go to the first floor or above that would be flood-free. So on balance, we've considered that, looking at the overall benefit of the scheme, what it provides, the care it provides, and everything, we're satisfied that it is acceptable and can be managed to an acceptable level as our NRW. So hopefully that clarifies some points there.
Councillor Reynolds, you put your hand up again.
Only very quickly, Chair. I just want to check with you, if I can, about the voting, because my camera's been off. Am I allowed to vote using the raise hand icon, or would you prefer me to sit out of this?
Okay, Councillor, yeah, because you've been part of the debate, you could raise your hand on the...
Okay, no problem.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
okay.
Councillor, sorry, can I just ask, as just to confirm that you have, you're obviously engaged in the debate, but just to confirm that you have listened throughout and been part of all the discussions. If you could just confirm that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you,
absolutely,
Councillor.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any more hands raised for any more questions. So I'll move on now to the officer's recommendation to grant this application. So could I show you a show of hands for all those in favour of the application? I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Councillor Horton, is that... Yes, you with the officer's recommendation?
I think he's frozen. Councillor Horton, have you frozen? Yeah, I can see you again now. Is that 4?
Yeah, I'm going in and out. It's 4, yes.
Okay,
thank you,
that's
Councillor.
unanimous then. Okay.
Sorry about that. The network's playing it.
Okay, thank you. I take it that's granted. The application is granted. No against. Thank you, all members, for taking part in this morning's planning committee. We don't have any more applications on, so thank you very much for all taking part.